CyCon is a very important time of year for Microsoft. This is where we come to share our latest thinking on cybersecurity and to challenge assumptions. Over the past few years, a number of my team members have come here to share really interesting research. Whether it was Kevin Sullivan, who talked to you about automated collective defense, or our thinking around the future of cyberspace and cyberspace 2025, and the dimensions of things that we would have to address as policy makers and as technical companies and as just operators in the domain. Or whether it was Jan Neutze and Angela McKay talking to you about our concepts of cybersecurity norms for governments and for industry. This year, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about something that I think we need in the international system, and that's an independent organization for attribution. Very interesting things are happening in the world. You heard the president talk about it, and you heard the ambassador talk about it. That's digital transformation. That's a real buzzword. Everyone gets excited. But these are fundamental changes that are happening. And I want to take just a moment to talk about what they mean. Today, many enterprises in the private sector are waking up to the fact that they're not really a bank anymore. They're actually an IT company that provides banking services. Or they're a transportation company that really is an IT company providing logistics. This transformation is incredibly powerful. We are basically moving cyber insecurity, opportunity, and power at an unprecedented rate. And it's being driven in some ways by advances in hyperscale cloud computing, IoT, AI. Super exciting. It's going to push capital and ideas and opportunities further and faster than I think we've ever seen in human history. And overall, I think the impacts of that super positive, wildly positive. But the changes will be disruptive, and they'll be dramatic, and at times they'll be dangerous. And why is that? Well, that's because digital transformation isn't just fantastic for commerce and for communication. Also, it turns out it's great for crime and conflict. Digital transformation rewards both players, and we need a more integrated thinking about this as we move forward. When you think about it, one of the big opportunities that come from digital transformation is really this idea of optimization and automation. And again, it's super great for enterprises, for civil society, for government, and in terms of increasing efficiency. But also know that the organizations that are building criminal exploits or are developing offensive capabilities also have those benefits. And the challenge that I think we have to face as a community is the unknown of the offensive advantage. Because the groups that are advancing in this space, are they going to train their AI algorithms for offense better than we train our AI algorithms for defense? Or what happens when they mix tool sets from the national security space with criminal exploits and create things that are not on anybody's radar? We saw a little bit of that with WannaCry, but that's an example, one example of what could happen in the future. Today we have more than 30 governments who are investing in cyber offensive operations. And I think this is driving insecurity in the international system in fundamentally different ways. How much money are we investing in offense globally? I can tell you what we spend at Microsoft for cybersecurity. We spend $1 billion a year, and we have 3,500 people who are dedicated to that. It's like the size of the FBI. But wow, 30 governments making these investments. I've been really pleased with the outcome of the OSCE confidence building measures as governments have started to come forward and articulate their strategies, share their organization for cyber operations. I think that's super positive for the international system. As an IT company, I have to admit it's a little disconcerting because everybody is shooting at you. Some governments look at it and they think, well, these are my traditional adversaries. But when we look at it, we have to look at them all, and we have to try to figure out what does that mean. We have a lot to think about in this space. What's worse is that's where we are today. My question is, where are we in 10 years from now? If we have 30 today, will we have 50 in 10 years? And it's not just so much how many we have, but what's the maturity? Do we have the right institutions at the international level to sort of deal with what I'm calling the maturity gap? It's interesting when you think that you could have emergent cyber offensive powers in the world. How nuanced do you think they are going to be in terms of proportionality and in terms of certain types of use or in certain types of restraint? Some of my friends in the national security community, when we have these discussions, say things like, well, you really only need to worry about 3 countries. Well, okay, maybe 5. Okay, 7. You go through this whole thing. In the IT world, I don't have to worry just about countries that matter. I have to worry about the ones that get lucky. And my customers have to worry about the ones that get lucky. And I wonder at some point if we aren't at a new inflection point as we go down this path. There have been some fundamentally great things that have happened, and you've heard the ambassador talk about some of them, and the president talk about some of them. You'll hear more today. I would say first, the UNGGE has done amazing work. The UN group of government experts has really pushed forward, I think, a very positive set of cybersecurity norms. The confidence building measures, as I mentioned earlier, from the OSCE, fantastic work. The Global Commission on Stability in Cyberspace that the Dutch government launched, another great contribution. And I think this sort of emergent focus on reinforcing that existing international law applies to cyberspace, fundamentally important. Do we need cybersecurity norms that are voluntary and non-binding? Absolutely. And do we need more confidence-building measures to promote cooperation amongst governments and amongst governments and the private sector? Yes. But on this slide here, I'm also showing something that I found rather fascinating. This is an excerpt from the Senate testimony by 3 government agencies, the Director of National Intelligence, a senior Defense Department official, and the Director of NSA. And every year they provide a threat briefing to the Senate. This was the first threat briefing I ever saw that had a paragraph on diplomacy. And I thought it was rather interesting what they had to say. Basically, that the promotion of the framework that I just talked about still has some real challenges in the world in terms of governments not agreeing on certain key concepts around what is an attack, what is aggression, what is use of force, and big questions around how others would interpret things like proportionality and sovereignty. And it leads us to the question of, where do we go? Are we at some sort of inflection point? Do we need something different? In February of this year, Microsoft's president, Brad Smith, put a very provocative idea on the table. He basically called for a digital Geneva Convention. This is a broad term that refers to sort of 3 different elements: a legally binding agreement, an industry tech accord, where industry would commit to certain principles that are basically 0 offense, only defense, and a range of other actions. And the third part was really the creation of something that we don't have today: a trusted international organization on cyber attribution. Now, when this announcement was made, it was really interesting to watch the reactions. The reactions from the tech sector and from civil society, incredibly positive. On the diplomatic front and in the national security space, there were some cynical eyebrows, and there were some grumbling, and I think some confusion. And so I'd like to clarify a few points on that today. The first one was, the title. Some people were upset that, the Digital Geneva Convention is about protecting civilians in war, and we're talking about peace, and did that, what did that mean? It's a term, and it's strangely enough, in an audience of 30,000 tech people, everyone sort of thought we were talking about peacetime. So I would say, let's not get concerned with the label. The second part came down to, oh my God, a legally binding agreement. This sounds like it would come from an autocratic government, not from Microsoft. And I think the thing there was, let's be clear. We've made a commitment to freedom of expression, to all sorts of things that keep markets open and drive innovation. That's who we are as a company, and those are our values, and that doesn't change. Our concern is really, how long do legally binding norms hold? At some point in the future, not next year, not in 5 years, but maybe in 10 years, we're going to get to a tipping point here in terms of technological dependency and offensive operations, and we're going to recognize we have a significant defense deficit we're going to have to deal with. And how are we going to bridge that? I don't know that you can do that by voluntary measures alone. The other misconception was, oh my gosh, are you saying that existing international law doesn't apply to cyberspace? No. Actually, we believe existing international law does apply to cyberspace. It's never been a question of applicability. I think it's one of interpretation and sufficiency. And how do we work around those edge cases to make sure that we can operate in peacetime and we can protect people? I think the Tallinn Manual, very important. I still think we have work to do as a community to deal with things. So I want to talk a little bit more about what we can do with attribution. Today, attribution is widely distributed. Technologies and expertise from companies and governments scattered all over the world. It's really difficult when you have certain types of complex international events occur where everyone sort of looks at each other and they sort of know who they think it was. Are we talking APT, ABC, or are we talking really cool name that's invented over here? Nobody wants to make an attribution. And yet, the science is growing in the private sector. And some would argue that private sector capabilities for attribution, and some for technical attribution, not political, are on par with some government states. The question is, where does that live? Should there be an international institution that integrates these elements together? It was interesting, a couple of years ago on the anniversary of the 70th anniversary of the UN, Madeleine Albright and Ibrahim Gambari put out a report looking at what should the future look like, what institutions were needed. And I was really struck by this quote because they really kind of nailed it in terms of we need new mechanisms, we need new partnerships, we need new tools. We cannot exist with the status quo. It will not secure us going forward. So this January, Microsoft reached out to the RAND Corporation, and we asked them for help. We asked them that based on their extensive work in the national security community and their extensive knowledge of delicacies around certain things like attribution, could you go out and look at existing models in the international space, things like the IAEA or other types of organizations, and try to look at what the key attributes of an international attribution organization might be, and make some recommendations about that. And off they went. This Friday, they will be releasing a report to share those findings publicly, and I would encourage you all to look at that report and engage in the dialogue around it. I want to share a few thoughts from that report today. They basically came out and recommended a non-governmental organization, a narrowly focused organization that did not have enforcement capabilities of any sort, that was really based on a set of principles: impartiality, inclusivity, technical competency, a narrow focus, looking at only those super high value attacks that have occurred against the private sector in times of peace, and an organization that's consensus-driven. So how do you go about building an organization like that? Well, first you have to deal with some core concepts with attribution, as many of you in this room know. You have to deal with the technical indicators, the political indicators. How do you link those issues together? And how do you sometimes have to develop a campaign perspective so that you can maintain sort of a durable understanding of actors and events? The second challenge is actually how do you communicate attribution? Does an NGO just release it on their website? Do they work with the victim? Does the victim then work with their government? And then what happens when you give that attribution to a government and they decide, I don't want to act on this? What then? So there's a series of really delicate protocols that need to be investigated, explored, and thought about in terms of moving forward. Why is an organization like this important? I think it's important because of what we just saw up there a few minutes ago. 30, 40, however many governments we start to move into this space, it's going to be important that we hold each other accountable. Countries need national security. Countries need to invest in the digital transformation of their militaries. And they need an appropriate mix of offense and defense capabilities. Nobody questions that. I think the question we need to ask ourselves is how do we make sure that they're being used appropriately in times of peace and we are protecting core private sector mechanisms, infrastructures, insert the word you want here, that are actually supporting the global economy. In the next 5 to 10 years, as more and more people migrate to hyperscale cloud computing, the world is going to look really different. When you sit in your office thinking, I'm safe, I have an on-prem network, I'm still here, I'm disconnected, the world around you is going to be relying on cloud. So the things that you're expecting, if there is some sort of attack or disruption, you could be in for an interesting wake-up call. One far more serious than the one we saw on May 12th. Rand also made another interesting observation in terms of this non-governmental organization that I think might be a little shocking. They basically came out and said, we don't actually think states should be involved in the organization for several reasons. You know, one, if states are involved, they may bring attribution capabilities based on classified data, and that would make things complicated. Two, they may try to influence the investigation. Three, they may try to influence the organization from even taking up an investigation. So how then does the organization work with governments? That's a mechanism that is not addressed yet in the report, but I think should be looked at. You know, there could be voluntary contributions from governments to the group based on the events. There could be other mechanisms where the group starts to engage governments in a variety of forums to share threat indicators, to share different types of things. And lastly, I would say it's important to recognize this group would not compete with anti-malware vendors and others in that space. Instead, this is an opportunity to bring the leading minds together and start to get to a level of international agreement and standards in attribution. It's a heavy lift, no joking about that. We've got a lot of work to do in that space, but it is entirely possible to succeed. We do, of course, have a few unknowns. How will AI play into this? What elements can we expect from machine learning that will advance or hinder attribution? We've seen a lot of super complex things today when it comes to false flag attacks. Somebody steals tools from one government, they hire another agency to run an exploit on that set of tools. Turns out the group they hired is actually the government that's, you know, you get into these like, how do you attribute that event? Is it both governments? Is it one? How do you think about that? How will quantum affect the work that we're doing? And how will emergent legal regimes change the nature of what we're doing? You know, today, I think at last count, we still have like 83 countries who are passing different methods of cybersecurity legislation, whether it's domestic or reauthorizing things for militaries or expanding capabilities. We have a lot to do. I think the important thing that I would encourage you all to do here is think about the future of attribution. Think about the institutions and investments we need to make at the international level and engage. And don't forget to engage with the private sector. We make the tools and the technologies that make these things possible. We respond to the events when things go wrong. Only together can we actually try to build a defensive capability that is going to ensure us in times of peace in the future. I really look forward to the remaining days here at CyCon and talking to you individually about your ideas and thoughts on these concepts. And I hope you have a great CyCon in beautiful Estonia. Maybe we'll even get a little more sun before the end of the week. Thank you very much.